Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Plato is attributed to the quote, "Wise men speak because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something." And Will Rogers said, "Never miss a good chance to shut up." Well, on today's episode, we talk about the power of keeping your mouth shut, why some people are compulsive talkers, how we know if we're an overtalker, tools and strategies that can help, and more. My guest is a husband and father, a New York Times bestselling author, journalist, and speaker. He was a writer on HBO's hit comedy series Silicon Valley and has worked as a technology journalist at Forbes, Fortune, and Newsweek. During his time at Forbes, he wrote a blog called The Secret Diary of Fake Steve Jobs that drew an audience of more than 1 million monthly readers. He's been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Economist, The Guardian, and many other media outlets. Please welcome the man who's telling us we really need to shut the F up so we can live happier and better lives. Dan Lyons. Dan, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. That was a great introduction. Thank you so much.
Well, it is absolutely my pleasure, and I am super excited about our conversation today. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point for us, Dan, would be for you to share a bit about your backstory. You know, as I've researched you and learned a lot more about your professional journey, I would like to wind the clock back just a bit to learn more about your origin story, where you came from, and as you're doing that, maybe you could share a couple lessons that you learned early in life that shaped the person who you are today.
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know how far back you want to go, but I grew up in Massachusetts, and I started off on a very definite track in college, and then completely fell off that track, and I became a journalist almost accidentally. And while I was in college, I started working at a newspaper on the side, and it didn't really occur to me that that would be a career. And the entire thing that I guess I would call my career has often felt very accidental. And I think there was a point where I finally realized, like, oh, okay, this, and I was well into my 30s, where I realized, this is it. I'm going to be a journalist for my life. And oddly enough, then I didn't really I still think of what I do is journalism, and I'll tell you why. In that I don't work at a magazine anymore. The last real journalism job I had was 2012 when I worked at Newsweek. And since then, I've worked a little bit in companies, in corporate settings. I've written books. I worked on a TV show. But all those things to me still seem to be journalism, in that I'm seeing things in the world and then writing about them in one way or another. And some people would call it storytelling. So that was what I learned, I think, early on, was that curiosity was the thing that drove me the most. And I think that's what makes a good journalist, is you are more interested in other people than in yourself, and you want to go. What makes me happiest is going and meeting people, fascinating, interesting people, and then writing about them and telling their stories. So, I guess I came to realize that was it. What I wanted to do was tell stories. I didn't really care so much about the medium, and that what drove me in that was just a sense of curiosity.
So let's pull on that curiosity thread here for a moment. And still staying back in time, you mentioned that you fell off the initial track that you were on, and then ended up on a path of journalism, accidental path, let's say.
Yeah.
Has curiosity always been a part of who you are? Were you a curious child and teenager? Were you always following that line of curiosity and asking interesting questions and doing interesting things?
I was a pretty terrible teenager, but I guess you could say that. So, for example, my parents wanted me to become a doctor. I grew up in this sort of community and area where, promising kids, smart kids, like the thing you would reach for, the gold ring for us would be, or the brass ring, whatever. Yeah, the ultimate thing you could be would be to be a doctor where I lived. That was it. And I did well in school, so my parents said, okay, well, we're going to send you to this private school, and you'll get a good education, and you'll go become a doctor. And very naively, my parents thought, well, if you're going to be a doctor, you should learn Latin, because a lot of medical terms are Latin, right? Which was like, okay, not, it wasn't really a good reason. But it turns out I loved Latin, right? And I was really, really good at it. Yeah, man, it was like all I wanted to do. By my senior year, I had finished all my graduation requirements. So I just basically, except for English. So I took English classes, and I just took all Latin. I did a directed study, and I studied Greek too, but I wasn't very good at Greek, and I didn't like it. But, at graduation, I won the classics prize at my school, which was, and we had a pretty serious classics department. And I really wanted to go off to college and study classics. And my parents were like, wait, the deal was med school. And I applied to these like 6-year medical programs, and I didn't get in, but like my parents sort of pushed me to apply to this 6-year dental program at Case Western in Cleveland. And I really did not want to do this. But I got in, and I got a scholarship, and there was all this pressure. And in fact, I'll tell you, there's a funny story. I've told I have 2 kids who are going to college next month, and this month, one of them. But we're talking about getting into college and applying. So I went out to Cleveland for my interviews. I had to interview with a panel of dentists. And I guess I did well in that interview. And then I had a different interview for a scholarship. And I went into this interview, and it was a nice woman. I was 18, so I thought she was old. I don't know how old she was, but everybody seems old. But I think she was maybe even a retired professor. And you have the introduction, and she says the question they always ask, like, "What's your favorite subject in school?" And I'm thinking that I know I'm supposed to say biology or chemistry, and I took the AP Bio exam and I got a 5. It's just, and I couldn't. And I said, you know what? I love Latin. I'm sorry. I love Latin. I live for that. And the woman looked at me and said, I taught Latin for 30 years. And I was like, damn, I got this scholarship. And we had a whole conversation about Latin. We didn't talk about anything else. And I realized it really was my passion. And it's a crazy passion. Anyway, I ended up going to this dental program. I lasted 1 year. I did okay. And it was 6 years. So you did all of your undergrad in 2 years, and then you went right to dental school. And I think down deep, I just knew it wasn't what I wanted to do, And I didn't know what I did want to do. I kind of thought, I want to go become a Latin teacher. My parents were dead set against that. So anyway, I lasted a year. I went back sophomore year, and I lasted just a few. I was home by Thanksgiving, and a complete dropout and failure. And it was a terrible thing. Although I've told my kids, the really good thing is if you fail in a big way early in life, it's really good because you kind of get it out of your system. You realize, all right, this is, life goes on. And then,
exactly.
Right? And I think it was, but I didn't feel that way at the time. My parents, my dad especially, was very, very disappointed. And then they became more disappointed because I went over and I thought, well, I've got a half year to kill before I go back. Now I'm going to go to UMass and do Latin, which is what I wanted to do anyway. So I'll go work for a while. And I lived in an area where there were a lot of textile mills, and there's one really, really big textile mill, that the place that invented Polartec. It was called Malden Mills. It was enormous, this enormous big brick factory on the Merrimack River. And you could walk in to the little shed any day and apply for a job, and you'd have a job tomorrow. So I went in and filled out the thing, and they said, education. Well, I've had some college, and what did you study? I put engineering. And they said, oh, yeah. So take this aptitude test, take this math test. And I took a math test, did well. And they're like, instead of a machine operator, would you like to become like an apprentice millwright, like a mechanic? You learn welding and carpentry and electrician and plumbing and just general mechanics. And I was like, yeah. And you made a lot of money, right? It was like a job that, it was a pretty good job. And so I got this job, and I stayed there for like 3 years because I loved it. Like I loved, I mean, it was tough. You had to be there early in the morning. You work 6 days a week. And, I'm this young kid from private school working with these sort of tough carpenters from Quebec and stuff. But it was great, man. I loved it. And then I decided at some point I got to go back to college, and I didn't even care what I did. I was very cynical. I just said, I need a bachelor's degree if I'm going to, do something. Maybe I'll go to law school. I don't know. I went back to school, and then at a community college, because now I'm on my own. My parents aren't paying for anything. So I ended up spending 3 semesters there instead of 1, and I took a journalism class, and I just fell into this class with this very charismatic woman who changed my life, right? And by the time I finished, I had an associate's degree. I was working at the local paper, and I did 2 more years of college as a commuter student while I was working. I got married while I was still in college, and yeah. So I guess you could say through there I was curious, and I just kept doing things that I didn't have a plan, but I just kept saying, "Well, that seems interesting, so I'll do that." And in a way, it was all good. I mean, another way, I wish I had just gone straight through college and gone to med school, and all my friends did. They all became doctors, and it worked out for them. But
well, it would have made your parents happy.
It would have made my parents so happy, and I think even me. I think, like, I in many ways, I think that could have been a great life, And I think I would enjoy it. I have friends who are doctors, and I think, man, it must be very satisfying to do what you do, to really help people, and I think it must be a very cool career. But anyway, that didn't end up being my career.
Well, we all have to follow our own path, and it's interesting that you have 2 children who are about to start college, and knowing the experience that you had and being able to share your own wisdom and the insights that you learned as you were going down that journey as well. So are your parents still living?
My dad is. My mother died a long time ago. She died young, but my dad is still alive, and I see him just a few times a year.
So he's been able to see and appreciate the path that you did go on, and the success that you've had, and the accolades that you have earned along the way. Did you have a good relationship with him after, when you decided to do something very different than what the parents wanted?
It took a while, I would say. And there was some tipping point, I think, where he finally felt like, okay, you're doing something. I think it was when I started working at Forbes, which is a big magazine, and then I went to Newsweek. And so it was like, okay, you can not brag about your kid, but you can say, oh, he's doing that. He felt like that was a measure of success.
Interesting.
But yeah, it was... and again, like he doesn't live nearby, so I wouldn't see him all that often. But yeah, it was. Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned that when you were at this community college that you had a teacher who changed your life. What was it about this particular teacher that had such a huge impact on you?
That's a very good question. I think if I can try to describe her, she was just a physically large woman, like 6 feet tall. And she had been a journalist, and she was tough. she kind of came from the old school, and she was very demanding. And if you said, "Oh, I'll come work one day a week on the school paper," she ran the school paper. She would just rope you in, and if you did well on something, she'd give you twice as much to do next time. She's just very demanding woman. And I think in some ways, my mother was still alive, but in some ways, this woman became kind of a maternal figure for me, and she made journalism seem important and serious, and she wasn't teaching it as a subject. I mean, the cynical way of putting it was she ran the school paper and she used her journalism classes to recruit warm bodies to come and do the paper. It was like part of your grade was to work on the school paper. But on the other hand, her whole thing was, this is something you do. You don't sit in a class and study how to do. You just do this, and you will be bad at it, and you'll get better. And she sort of helped me just go out and get a job. I think, and she kind of believed in me at a time when I was pretty beaten up. I had failed out of school. I felt pretty bad about myself. I was working in a factory. I'd kind of lost a lot of confidence, and she kind of was. I don't know if she ever said it this way, but she kind of thought, you're really good at this, and I'm going to keep pushing you to get better. But she kind of believed in me, and I think, I think I loved her, in a way like a mother. I got to be friends with her son, and then when she died, I went to the funeral. But I felt almost like I was another one of her kids. That's overstating it, but. She meant a great deal to me. I think because I just met her at a time when my life was not very good, and she kind of picked me up.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful thing to happen in life, and it reminds me of the power of mentorship. And
right.
When we are around people who can say the right thing at the right time and have a certain level of experience and can connect with us on a level that's much deeper than just surface level, do this, do that, but really care about us and care about who we're becoming. That's tremendous. I mean, what an amazing life experience for you. You mentioned that she believed in you. So I want to pull on the thread of belief and identity for a moment, because this is such an important area of life and business in general. When we go through transitional moments, whether it's pulling out of college, whether it's changing a job, whether it's somebody who's in the NFL who no longer can play, that whole idea of identity and belief becomes so relevant. So for you, you mentioned about you had a lack of confidence at this particular point. What was something that you believed about yourself early on that you later discovered, Dan, wasn't true?
Wow. I don't know. I think there was a period when I think I thought I was lazy and that I just didn't try very hard, and I didn't really want to work hard. I just wasn't into that. And I later found out that no, once you find something, you love, like I am like an obsessive worker. I can really work a lot, but maybe that, I don't know. That's a really tough question. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I appreciate you giving it some thought. So I'm curious, what are some personal philosophies or values that guide your decisions today, that guide your life and guide the things that you say yes and no to? Can be one thing, one personal philosophy, one value, something that really is at the underbelly of everything that you do.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's something that I look back and say this is maybe the greatest mistake of my entire life, and I only realized this, recent years. So I was way too old, and I tried to tell my son this. I think for way too long I was very cynical and a pessimist. I was a journalist, and I could look at a new technology or something, and I could see all the reasons why it wouldn't work. And I've come to believe that that is exactly the wrong way to be. That the way to live your life is to be optimistic, to believe things will work out, to not be cynical, to be optimistic rather than pessimistic. And it was not a tough lesson to learn, but one that I wish I'd learned earlier. I always thought people who were super optimistic were naive, and I didn't want to be naive. I didn't want to be a sucker. Now I think it's much better. You're much better off to be optimistic, to think that things are going to work out.
So how did you make that switch? What was that process like for you? Because that can be very, very difficult.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's very difficult. I think part of it was just being a journalist and writing about technology. My field was always writing about tech companies. That was my background at Forbes. I covered like IBM, big technology companies, and at Newsweek. And so that would mean companies like Apple that almost died in 1996, and then look where they are now. And I think if you're honest, you watch these companies, you think that's never going to work out. But over and over they do. A lot of them do, and you think, I was stupid to be so pessimistic about those guys. What didn't I see that they did? And I don't think it was like, there was something in their balance sheet or something I could have that I missed. That's why I didn't see how successful they were going to be. What I didn't understand is they were just relentlessly optimistic, so they kept going. Right? They would just keep going because they believed this was going to work out, and and it doesn't always, right? But that was the key. That was why I was wrong, is that I just didn't realize that sheer will, just this sheer optimism, might be the key to success. And even the ones that fail, like I do a lot of stories saying this company's going to go out of business, they're going to go bankrupt, and often they would. You could look at the income statement and see, okay, this is, and what's happening in the market, this isn't going to work out. So I learned, I guess, from watching a whole generation of technology companies that they work out more often than you think. And I think that I had to realize that I had been wrong about a lot of things that I covered. That I had been wrong. So.
What an eye-opening experience for you, and something that can radically change your optics on life and on everything that we experience in life. So you share this wisdom, this knowledge that you've gained and that you're working through yourself. You share this with your son. How does it land with your son, and what does he say?
I think it lands. I think he believes me. He's at an age, 18, where he's trying to figure out what does he want to do. And he has a twin sister, my daughter, who's very driven, who knows exactly what she wants to do, and she is going off to college. She's going to conquer the world, and she has she's very. I don't know if it'll stay that way, but my son is trying to figure things out, and what should I do for a living? What do I do to make money? How will I have a life? And so I've kind of told him that he's going to a liberal arts college where you can take anything you want. It's just float, keep taking things, whatever you think looks cool. And one day, one of those teachers is going to, boom, it's going to come alive for you. And then the other thing is, be optimistic. I think he buys. I think he gets that, because I've explained it just the way I explained it to you, why I think it was wrong. So yeah, I think he believes me. He's very afraid right now. He's leaving for college in August 15th. We take him, which is less than 2 weeks, and he is really almost dreading it, I think. So I'm trying to just kind of help him Yeah.
Yeah. I thought for a second there you were going to tell me that you were going to share with him that he should go to dental school.
No. Yeah.
No.
That's a good one. You're going to dental school, you little. No, the funny thing is now I think that experience made me quite the opposite. Like I've been telling him, I'm not going to tell you where to go to college, almost to the point that I thought maybe I'm not giving him enough guidance. Maybe he needs direction and I'm not giving it to him. But I told him a couple of things. One is I'm not going to tell you where to go, what to study, because I think it's not going to work out anyway. I can't really do that. But two, if the whole thing blows up, no matter whether, like, there is no fail. If you come home, you come home. Like I'm not gonna be the way my dad was. My dad was very, very disappointed and. Yeah. So I tried to tell him those two things. Like there's always a safety net and you just you'll figure it out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the world is full of opportunities, which is fantastic. It's just become so much smaller. So he'll definitely find his way, as you said. Yeah. So your latest book, which of course we're going to link to in the show notes, it is cool. STFU. Which, of course, is Shut the F Up, the power of keeping your mouth shut in an endlessly noisy world. This is a really touching, deep, and important piece of work. You've written a number of books. This particular one resonates very deeply with me, because I'm very challenged in that area. Well, let's say I have been and I'm continuing to be a work in progress. Mm. And you tell a personal story, which really becomes the baseline, if you will. It's the thread that runs through this book. And then you combine some leading behavioral science with lots of advice on ways that we can talk less, that we can listen more, and that we can communicate with intention. So let's talk about the personal story, one of which you mentioned your daughter, who you said is very driven, who's going to conquer the world, right? She's ready to take this on.
Yeah.
But your relationship with her was not always the way it is today, nor was your relationship with your wife. So tell us part of that story and why you wrote this book.
Well, I wrote the book because I came to a point in my life where I realized, I had made a lot of mistakes, and I wouldn't say that talking too much was definitely a problem, and it was at least partly to blame for that. And literally, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I said, this certain thing would never have happened if I just learned how to. And I actually wrote a STFU, and this person said, yeah, that's right. Yeah, you can blame everybody else, but if you hadn't said that, none of this could have happened. Yeah, and I said, well, maybe that's not a bad idea for a book, and. So my wife and I had separated. My daughter and I were sort of, we didn't get along very well. And so these things were happening sort of in parallel. And I started doing research about talking too much. And then, I tell you what, then you just stumble into this amazing world of behavioral science that's all about why people talk too much. Some people, why some people talk more than others. And then these incredible bits of research about these connections between the way you talk and your emotional and physical well-being. It gets down to the level of like your immune system. It's incredible in that way. And then, there are things like you can talk less and you'll prevail in negotiations. You're more likely to get a promotion. There are all these things like you can get more, right? There's a little, selfishness. So at first it was like I can avoid calamities. Next, it was, oh, look, I can get a better salary or a better price on that car. But then, then the big third one was, wow, if you don't just shut up, but if you shut up and then use that empty time to listen, you can make the lives of the people around you better. So it's not just you. It's like listening is sort of a gift that you give to the world, that you give to the people around you. And I would say in your line of work, I think a lot of people think, podcaster, you're a great talker, but probably your skill is also being a great listener. And you probably understand that, like the power of really deeply, actively listening to someone can transform a relationship. So it was played a big role in helping me get back together with my wife, and helping me create this really, really good relationship with my daughter. So this sort of story of the book winds up there, that I start off in this bad place, end up at this good place. And along the way, by the way, I learn a lot of really interesting stuff, and then I, put that in a book. Yeah.
So a couple of things before we explore too much more deeply, and there are some definite areas that I'd love to be able to touch on relative to the book. I want to make sure that our listeners know that you, as far as your relationship with your wife, you had gone through therapy. There were other things that you were doing to work on your relationship that, whether they helped or not, maybe there were seeds of things that were helpful. But I'd love it if you would speak to that for a moment, as far as the things that you were doing to try to build a better relationship, and then ultimately what did help, that actually did help tremendously. But then also, I'm just curious, were people telling you that you were an over talker? Were they telling you to shut up? Or was this something that you just weren't self-aware of?
Oh, no. I knew. I believe that every over talker, as I call them, they know that people who talk too much know that they talk too much. There's actually a test you can take. I found this as I was doing research, called the Talkaholic Scale. There it is. And I put it on a website, so you can go. It's just talkaholicscale.com, and you can take it. 16 questions, self-scored, and it tells you whether you're a talkaholic, which is an extreme version of an overtalker, and I needles off the end of the chart, right? But no, like we would go to get-togethers, like the neighborhood party where for some kid's birthday, and all the families are going to be there, and I would go in. I'd be like, don't talk too much. I know I'm going to get nervous, or I'm going to get going, or I'm going to start trying to be funny, and then I'll get a laugh. And I would tell my wife beforehand, like, give me a signal or something, and then sometimes I would just go and try to avoid people at the party. I would go to the party but sit in another room, and people thought I was crazy. And I kind of thought, no, you don't understand. I'm really sparing you having to listen to my, it's like, my kids would be like, everybody you meet, you're on a chairlift at skiing, you meet, you talk to them, you Uber drivers, just waiters. My wife said, like, every waiter you have ever met, like you end up talking to them, no, so I very much knew, that it was a problem long before it really hit the wall with a couple of work things and a couple of personal things. But that was I definitely did. I definitely was aware of it. Oh, and then the first part of your question was about my wife. And
therapy. So you were going through therapy, and what ultimately was the big thing that made the biggest difference?
Well, we're the kind of people, we were going to couples therapy for a long, long time, not because we were always on the brink of breaking up, but we're just those kind of people. We're like therapy people. We like therapy. We both go to therapy, and then we go to therapy together. We're just, I think we live in a little bubble where people go to therapy. Anyway, and so we do all this talk therapy, and we had one after another. And often we would go in Wednesday night, we'd drive over together, go to the thing. And we'd walk in fine and walk out really angry at each other. And it didn't work for us, right? And then, so when we were separated, I kind of thought, I came up with this idea that I call non-talk therapy, which is what if we spent time together, but I just STFU, right? We'd go walk the dog in the woods and let the dog go for a swim. And I would just, before I got there, tell myself, just be quiet. You don't have to talk at all. I didn't used to like silence. Silence would drive me crazy. I would race to fill in the silence. I thought, just sit together. And sometimes we'd go to dinner and I would make a little game for myself. Like, I'm not going to say anything except responding to her. And I'll just ask open-ended questions and just follow her. And if we ended up sitting there for a while having dinner quietly, fine. It was really hard for me to do this. But it really changed things. And then I sort of thought, well, this is anecdotal. Then I found research that they've found that couples who spend time together in silence, that actually strengthens the bond between the two of you. So it was another one of these little examples I kept finding of, you'd find some research report from communication researchers in the Netherlands had done this study in 2004, whatever. There's all this sort of buried research out there. So.
Amazing. It truly is. And I, as you were sharing this and as I was researching for our conversation today and listening to your book as well, I could see myself in or through your eyes as you were telling the story, because there are some, obviously lots of differences, but there's also some similarities there. And, I'll just share, I've shared this before on the podcast, but with you specifically, that when I was growing up, I was very quiet. I didn't have much confidence at all. I had a lot of self-doubt, and there was a lot of comparison happening in my family, and I never quite felt that I could live up to what I should have been doing. And I stayed in the corner. And in a classroom, I would stay in the back of the room. I absolutely didn't want to be called on and tried to be as small as I could. Then, when I got into the corporate world, I remember I took a Dale Carnegie course on effective human relations and communication. And that opened my eyes to a whole nother world of personal development and things that I could do to just improve on becoming a better human being, becoming a better listener, a better communicator. And when you were describing your family saying when you're at a restaurant, you're engaging with the host or the waiter or whoever it happened to be, or the Uber driver, no matter where it was, you're carrying on a conversation. My family could attest to the same thing, because I was doing everything I could to try to build that muscle and learn to connect with people. But I went overboard. And I had to really work to throttle back. And I still catch myself, but at least today I'm able to pause for a moment, and I can recognize usually when too many words are coming out. My mouth is moving faster than my brain is. But it's a really interesting place to be. And I think that the self-awareness piece is so very important, and having people around you who are willing to give honest feedback and be candid and be kind about it, but can share with you that, Dan, Jay, you are just talking way, way too much, and people don't want to be around you.
But people also don't always want to tell you that, right? Because they're polite, right? You have to be someone who's close to you who can tell you that. That's interesting, though, that you were quiet as a kid. That's and I did a little reading about Dale Carnegie, and apparently listening was a big part of his whole thing too. But that's interesting that you basically taught yourself, I guess, or trained yourself. There was some research that shows that people who are very, very shy or communicatively apprehensive can actually learn to be less shy. Overtalkers, the same researchers believe, can't be cured. But I believe you can. And I think you probably have done it, right? You've gone through this process. It's, here's the thing. I think, this is far afield. We're all kind of struggling through life, and we're all trying to be happy for whatever that means, right? And I think we're all always looking for something that we could change that would create more happiness. And so, to me, that's really ultimately what it was all about. That it's just communication. Is there a way to communicate effectively that makes you happier? And does that make sense? Do you feel happier when you go, oh, I caught that one just right? Like there's the right balance.
It does. It absolutely does. It's been a life-changing experience for me. It's strengthened relationships,
really,
real relationships,
yeah.
And I appreciate the ability to listen to someone else's story, listen with empathy, listen with the interest to understand that person's point of view, and not listen because I'm waiting for the opportunity to say something, or that I'm only using that as an opportunity or a platform to be able to spill all over that person. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting place to be today. And one of the things that you talk about in the book, again, there's a lot of research that goes into this and a lot of science behind it, but share with our audience why we tend to overtalk. What are some of the specific reasons? You've already alluded to one or two of them, but if you could maybe highlight those, that would be very helpful.
Sure. I mean, there's research that shows talkaholics, for example, the people who did the research on talkaholism took many, many years and found out that they believe it has to do with an imbalance in neuronal activity in this one part of your brain. That one lobe fires more than the other. In which case, you're kind of stuck with that. You can't rewire it. But there are also, people who talk too much because they get nervous. Or there are connections to ADHD and to bipolar 2, which is sort of the mild form of bipolar disorder. But, people who are a little bit manic obviously would start talking a lot. People who have ADHD will talk too much, which is interesting because your over-talking can be a symptom that leads you to look at other things, could maybe take you to figure out, oh, I have ADHD, and you can, get medication. And I've heard stories of people who, as adults, were diagnosed with ADHD, got medication, did therapy, and it helped. But they were also overtalkers, and it helped with that. So, amazing. Yeah, there are connections to other things. Yeah.
So, the talkaholic scale that you mentioned.
Oh yeah.
So the 16 questions. So I did take this questionnaire.
Oh, you
did? I did, and I'm going to encourage everyone who's watching and listening right now to do exactly the same thing. It won't take that long, but the one thing that you do mention is to not overthink this, to just answer the questions, come up with the first response that you think of. And I went into this without any particular expectations. Of course, I had read enough of your story, and it's planting the seed in my own mind that, oh my gosh, am I going to hit an 80? So my score was actually 25.
Oh,
and so I'm curious, have you taken it multiple times, and have you seen a trend at all with people who took it one time, started to work on some tools and strategies that you provide as an example, and then maybe take it again 6 months later? I mean, I know your book has only been out for a bit, but have you done any of those types of studies to look at time differences?
I have not. I did it with other people. I did it with myself, and by the time I finished the book, I got a lower score than when I started. I think the highest score possible is 50, and I got a 50. I think later I was sort of around a 40, which is still kind of a talkaholic, but it was I did a little better. The one thing I'll tell you that I've found as I've been going around talking about the book or, giving talks or how many people come up to me and say, I really have a problem with this. And not oh, yeah, I talk too much, or, oh, my friend talks about it. Like people who are really seriously struggling, really, who it's really a painful thing for them. And I've had people reach out to me, online on email and say the same thing. Boy, this really helped me. But some people really suffer because of their inability to STFU. That it like me, some people are really in pain because of it, and that's one thing that struck me, because I think I wrote the book and I was feeling a little glib, this will be a funny book, and then in the course of writing it, I became more earnest, but I wasn't ready for that response from people. But yeah.
Well, what I love about the book is that not only do you tell the personal stories which help connect some of the salient points, and then, of course, you provide the research that's been done as well, but then you provide us the tools and the strategy, some things that we can do,
right,
some advice that you can provide to us as long as we're willing to put these things into action and give them a try. So I would love it if we could take just a moment or two to share some of the ways. You give 5 ways as an example of ways that we can STFU. So maybe share a couple of those to give our audience some hope and some things that they can try.
Yeah, sure. I'll pick 2 that are sort of unusual, because a lot of them are just, what you might expect. But one is quit social media, or at least get well off social media. And I'll try to do it quickly, but essentially social media is designed to get you talking, or quote unquote talking online, to get you engaged, to keep you there so you see more ads. And they're very, very good at doing that. They're using AI, they're using powerful computers that know more about you than you know about yourself, and they push your buttons and get you to start not just reading, but talking. And then part of that thing they do is to make you angry, and then that anger carries back with you into your life, and that agitation carries back into your life. So it ends up making you an overtalker in your offline life too. So I believe that you need to get out of that loop. You need to get out of the loop of what's being done to your brain, and you'll find it helps you talk less. The other thing is the flip side of that, which is if you find ways to spend time in silence, you can bring that back into your life. It has the opposite effect. And one thing that I took up and that I write about in the book is called forest bathing. And it sounds crazy. It sounds like one of those wacky New Age things. But it essentially, it originated in Japan with a very, very scientific background. And it's essentially spending time in the woods alone and doing nothing. And it's not the same as meditation, but there are scientific beliefs that there are sort of oils that trees are shooting out all the time and you're absorbing them. But the American version of it is more about just communing with nature. But I found it amazing. So those are 2 things, I think. Get off social media and try to find pieces of your day where you can spend time in silence. Yeah.
I love that. So since you brought up meditation, of course you said forest bathing is not meditation. It's different. But do you meditate?
I don't. And I tried, and I got one of those apps and everything, but I fall asleep. It's terrible. But I don't. Do you meditate? Can you do it? You do?
Yes.
Every day?
I do. I started a little over 3-4 years ago, and I had a very difficult time at the very beginning, but it's been very, very helpful for me. And I'm just going to add this for everyone else who's watching and listening. Understand that meditation, it's called a meditation practice. because it's something we practice, right? We don't become, it's not like you reach this point of expertise. We just practice every day, whether it's 1 minute, 5 minutes, or longer. If we just sit and we breathe and we pause, it can make a significant difference. And it's been very helpful for me. But I feel you. I understand where you're coming from. And
how much time do you spend a day?
So when I first started, I was meditating for approximately 5 minutes per day. Now it's more like 20 to 30 minutes, usually around the 20-minute mark. But I do guided meditation, so I'm also kind of like what you had mentioned, using an app. And I find it easier for me to listen to someone's voice to guide me along versus having a mantra, that I'm chanting to myself, if you will. I tend to get very distracted. So it's been helpful.
I wonder if I should try that. What app? If I'm going to try that, I could do 5 minutes. I think
you could do 5 minutes. Okay.
I could start there like you did, but what app would I use?
So I have found, and they're not a sponsor of the show, but they're an excellent app, and it's Headspace.
Oh,
That would be one of the apps that I would recommend. There's also Waking Up is another.
Waking Up?
Yep,
Okay.
Waking Up is another excellent app. And when we wrap up this conversation, Dan, I'll shoot you an email with some links to some recommended apps to check out. So
I would like to try it.
Absolutely. So as we are wrapping up our conversation, a couple of quick things. I do have all of the links to your social handles. Obviously, we're going to link to your book. We're going to link to where you can take the Talkaholic scale as well, which is part of the book too.
Yeah. Good way to get it is buy the book. Yeah.
Yes, it most definitely is.
But it's a lot of money to take a quiz, so...
Well, but you know what? It's well worth it. It's one of those investments that when we invest in ourselves, it creates a ripple effect, and it will actually have an impact on other areas of your life as well. So, Dan, if you could ask one question of anyone who is either alive or no longer living, who would it be, and what would be the one question that you would ask?
Oh, boy. Wow, that's a good one. I think my dream meeting would be Barack Obama, and I wouldn't want to ask him anything political or about policy, but I've always been fascinated and impressed and jealous about the way he sees the world. So I don't know what the specific question would be, but somehow find out, like, how did you look at the world? He's very, very bright, but like he's also very successful. Like, yeah, what is your way of engaging with the world? What is your basic philosophy about human beings? Yeah, I would love to hear him just talk about that. Anyway, that's probably
beautiful.
Yeah.
Very good. So, Dan, I would love it if you would leave our audience with a challenge. What would you challenge all of us, including me, to do?
Oh, I have a great one. So Bill Marriott, the guy who built the Marriott chain, actually inherited it from his dad, but in the 50s. So he's the one who built Marriott. He says, his famous saying is, the most important words in the English language are, what do you think? And I try to make it a practice every day. My challenge would be, sometime today, in some conversation, find a way to just say, what do you think? And then really, really listen. But just use those 4 words. I feel like they're, like he says, the most powerful words in the language.
Wow. That is powerful. Thank you for sharing that challenge. I know I'm going to take you up on that one. So, Dan, thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I am so grateful for the opportunity to have our conversation, for you sharing of your insights and really pulling the curtain back a bit and sharing your personal story. and just going deep in some areas that maybe we don't always touch on. I think it's important to give some context. You did just what you needed to do, and I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and I look forward to learning about meditation from you. I really will look forward to those links, so thank you.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. And I do have a quick favor to ask. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That would go a long way in helping us expand our reach and continue to bring you amazing guests just like Dan Lyons. And until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you pick up a copy of STFU and apply the lessons you learn. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.